Right, what's the time? Christ, 5:30. Might have to call it a day. Got it nice and fitted up now. So we're going to use the brass where it's laser cut, it's definitely square. So I'm going to use this as reference for squaring the rest of the block before I shape it. And where this is all glued together, I don't actually need to have the knife in here whatsoever to shape it, and I have no risk of scratching. Fresh 36 grit Cubitron, definitely not meant for wood, but I find that it removes material really nice and quickly without generating any heat in it, which is important when I'm using brass because it heats up so much it can quite often pop off. It's all nice and square to the ferrule now, and it's about a good size to start shaping, so I'll just take the knife and just check before I do anything more that it's nice and centre and square and parallel to the back of the spine. That way I can start putting in some chamfers and bringing the stock down to its final size. At this stage it's always good to just keep testing it, just make sure you don't remove too much material. It's always very easy to remove more. It's, as you can imagine, very difficult to put any back. I'm fairly happy with how wide it is, how tall, sorry, it is in comparison to the spine here and at the back. So now I'll keep the blade in and just work out how thin I want it on the sides. Start to thin it down on one side and start putting in the taper that I like on the handle. Brass is starting to really heat up now just from the friction of the belt, so I just leave it to cool down for a minute before I carry on. Try and avoid dunking it in water for the obvious reason. Right, this has cooled down nicely now, so we'll go back and taper the other side. Happy with the taper on that now. So as you can see, obviously considerably thinner at the top than it is towards the end. This isn't the final thickness, but I like to leave a bit more material on for when I grind the facets, just in case for whatever reason I mess something up, I've got more material to remove. So now I'll take the knife back out, we'll put some facets in on each corner and then blend it all in nicely so it's all nice flat lines. Taking the sharp corners off on a 400 grit belt, which is just an aluminium oxide. I'm happy with that as a shape now, so I'll switch over to the 400 grit aluminium oxide belt I mentioned and just really neaten up these facets and all the flat sides, ready for some hand sanding. So I've got the final shape and started the polish on the handle, just like a consistent 400 grit finish the whole way around. Just added light chamfers to the sharp corners at the front and back, just so it's not uncomfortable to use. And we'll take it some hand sanding, get it all nice and polished up and ready to glue. I think some of that reposition adhesive would work on this.
Yeah, it should do, yeah.
Hold it in place. Just literally just spray it on this. So just put this on now. So theoretically, I should just be able to peel this off, shouldn't I?
Yeah, you can peel it off. And...
Oh, no, that is satisfying. And that is dry. No glue on it whatsoever. Incredible. I'm thoroughly impressed. Yeah, and it's still sticky now, so I'm going to put my next sheet straight on there. That's crazy. Revolutionary would be a good word. I've jumped from 800 to 2000. absolutely don't need to take the same grit gap as you do with sanding a blade. Such a soft material, and even brass is extremely soft, so you can polish it relatively quickly. So there's absolutely no need to start from a low grit and go all the way up to 2000, stopping on the way. 400 grit on the grinder, 800, 2000. I'll then take it to a buffing wheel for the final polish. You can etch a patina or etch carbon steel in so many different things just to get it in there. So coffee works, but even to an extent lemon juice will work, and vinegar, orange juice if you leave it long enough. But even just if you want to just make a protective patina on your knife, you just cut a lemon in half and just rub it up and down your blade, you'll see the oxide forming on it almost immediately. As long as you wash that off and neutralise, that's a good way to start a patina. Pineapples, anything acidic really, just cut anything that's acidic. Onions definitely work. The best way to get a good patina on your knife is just to use it a lot and look after it and just let it build itself up. You can force a patina, yeah. Andy at Cuttable Knives, he does great forced patinas, mustard and ferric chloride. So he'll etch the blade, oxidize the whole thing. I'm pretty sure he then cleans it off and then applies mustard, so it not only gives it a great pattern, but it also has already patinaed the blade, so it'll protect it to an extent as well. He does some crazy work with that. He can make really intricate patterns just by throwing mustard at his knife and washing it off. French's American style mustard, I've told. Apparently that's the best one because it's so horrible, it's just acidic and chemically. Yeah, anyone that I know that does mustard patinas on their knives uses, French's hot dog mustard and the little squeezy bottles. While sitting here drinking instant coffee, I will say how terrible instant coffee must be for your insides, because when I coffee etch Damascus, you empty it out afterwards and you see the sludge in the bottom of just dissolved metal. And you think, if that's acidic enough to dissolve steel, I dread to think what it does to your insides. Very effective for etching steel because it doesn't remove a lot of material. Ferric chloride will dissolve material very quickly. Coffee won't do that as such. It will form a surface oxidation, which isn't particularly hard wearing. It will scratch off quite quickly, but it will quite happily turn most high carbon steels black and give some sort of layer of protection to it. You just have to be careful with doing anything like that to neutralise any acid, because just drying the blade afterwards won't work, because the oxides on the surface will still be acidic, and then you'll come back the next day and instead of a nice black patina, you'll have a nice orange rust across the whole thing. Yeah, but I believe the new stuff from GFS is made in Sheffield from 95% reclaimed steel. So not only is it made in Britain, it's recycled and it's cheaper than the stuff from Germany, so it's even better. I'm going to set up the buffing wheel on the table, get some white compound, which I found is the best for any sort of stabilised woods. Yeah, it's got a nice polish on there. I try not to make the handles too shiny because it can look a bit tacky otherwise, but a nice good shine where you can see the light reflecting off is enough for me. So we're going to clamp this up, wrap this up in some blue roll to protect it, and I'll hold it vertically in a drill vise, mix up some epoxy, and then we can just sit the tang in there and leave it to cure. Just going to use the drill vise just to keep the handle nice and vertical while I'm putting the knife in, stopping the epoxy from running out, and it just gives me two hands. Makes life so much easier. strange tip, which I found that works. Cleaning it up, not that I in any way condone smoking, but cigarette filters are fantastic for cleaning epoxy out of corners. Cigarette filter, a bit of paint thinners or acetone or something like that. You can really just get in there, just take any of the epoxy straight off. Hugely, hugely helpful. Even if you're not a smoker and you're not worried about your partner questioning you on smoking, keep some in the workshop because they're very, very handy. It's like a lot of people will use cotton buds, but where they're round at the end, you can't get into that corner without putting a lot of pressure on, and just those, they just really comfortably just remove any excess. Now we just leave that to dry. Knife we've made today is single bevel and it's ground very, very close to zero. I have ground them all the way to zero before, but it's harder for people to maintain. So once it goes dull, sharpening a zero ground edge on stones can be quite tricky, and you can really damage the edge if you don't know what you're doing. So I'd go very close to zero, but then I will add an initial second bevel on there as well for the sharpening, just so people have got something to sharpen to, basically, to maintain it. A single bevel edge, they're very versatile for what they are. I wouldn't recommend it for cutting any big hard vegetables and things like that, because it works like a chisel and it wants to pull it through at an angle, and you might end up just cracking your way through like a pumpkin or something like that, because it's not angled in the right way. But they're very good for food release, because obviously if it's single ground, I'm over exaggerating here, but if it's single ground like that, whenever you're pushing it through anything, it's pushing the food in that out direction. Especially if you grind a recess above the bevel as well, the food won't stick to it at all. Downsides to single bevel edges are obviously they are only left or right-handed. So if you're left-handed trying to use a right-hand biased knife, you're going to get terrible cuts because your knife's going to be going all over the place. And if you're left-handed, it's very difficult to try and buy single bevel knives because nobody makes them, because obviously, like, I don't know what percentage of the population are right-handed, but it's considerably more than left. Most common one that I get requested is just flat grind, double flat grind. So it's just, yeah, double bevel, exactly the same angle on both sides, flat ground, never to zero. Rarely anybody asks me to zero grind a knife. So I generally go somewhere between 0.4 and 0.7 millimeters on the edge before I sharpen it. Sometimes thinner, sometimes maybe slightly thicker, depending on what it's being used for. So the handle's nice and glued up now. I always leave the epoxy that I've mixed it on just on the side so I can test when it's dry, because then I know it's dry on the inside of the handle, which means it's ready to take this tape off. I should take this off and it will be perfectly clean underneath and ready to sharpen. Well, I must say I'm very impressed. There's very little residue left on there whatsoever. Just set this stone up now. Where the grind is very, very thin, I don't use any belt or any rough stones at all to set the initial bevel on there. I'll just go straight to a 3000 grip, which is more than adequate for setting the bevel. This is obviously a single bevel knife, so it's flat on this side and a bevel on that side. So I'm only going to raise the burr from this side downwards, and then we'll just strop the burr off the other side. Most important thing with any sharpening is just consistent pressure and consistent angle. It doesn't take long to learn how to sharpen like this. It's just practice. You just got to mess it up a few times and be able to look at it afterwards and see where you've gone wrong. Generally aim for 22.5 degrees on most of my knives. Depending, some of the single bevel ones I'll actually just polish the whole bevel with a stone and bring it to zero, but it really depends on the style, and it's quite easy to work out 22.5, because obviously if you just think of this as 90, halfway is 45, halfway again is 22.5. That's generally where I fit. But I'm just going to keep going until I can just feel a consistent burr on the back side the whole way down. So I'm reaching a burr here, but not there, not in the middle, but I am towards the tip. So when I go back, I'm just going to focus on this section here, and then this section there to bring it back. Just feeling it, yeah. Obviously you can't feel that on a machine as easily. Well, you can, but there's a good chance you remove too much material in the wrong place first. It's just nice to do it by feel, but you just literally just feel, and you can feel the burr raised where you know you've ground to zero and it's rolled the steel around the other side. And then if this was a double bevel, I'd switch it over as soon as you feel this bevel, and then run a burr the other side, and that way you know you're down to zero. But I'm already at zero on 90% of this, just from this literally 60 seconds of sharpening. So I'd literally just need to work on this back corner there, and then we'll switch to another grip. I'm not going to remove the burr now. A lot of people will tell you need to, but I prefer not to do that until the final grip. I just leave the burr sitting there. Yeah, I'm confident there's a burr running the whole way down now. You can probably hear it. So I'll clean this off to remove the slurry from the 3000 grip, just so it doesn't affect the next one. switch over to 8000. This is not a nice stone, this is just a very cheap combination stone, but I found you can still get good results with it. So I haven't decided to buy any more expensive ones. So I'll go back to the same side. Like I said, this is a single bevel, so I want to keep this side flat, only have the bevel running in that direction. So I'll just go over to 8000. You can tell by the sound, and you can also tell by how much finer the slurry is, but this is removing much less material and more polishing at this point rather than actually setting a bevel in the slightest. It takes a lot less time once the initial bevel is set between each grit. Clean it off. Basically just check the length and just check that I'm happy with the level of polish that's on there and that the burr is still raised on this back side. I'll then use this very fine stone, almost like a strop, just to pull the burr away. And that should provide a very, very sharp edge. And a good test that I like to do is just running it across your thumbnail, feeling if it bites in. If it skates across the surface, you know it's probably not that sharp, but if you can actually run it across and it just takes little tiny shavings off, that's generally a good sign that it's very, very sharp. Single bevel knives, quite often people will polish the bevel itself right to zero. I choose not to because it gives people that don't necessarily have a lot of time to spend sharpening. It just gives them that little bevel that all they have to do when they go to sharpen it is on their own stone. They've just got to find that bevel and just repolish it, and it's always going to be there. And then when it gets too thin, they can send it back and I'll thin it out for them. But it should be very, very sharp.
Want to win this knife? Check out ukbladeshow.com or click the link in the description to find out more.